ABM, Anapanya method, is very unique in the approach that we bring to it. It's probably more helpful for me to just speak to what it is as opposed to compare it to other modalities in which I'm not trained. Since my background is as a physical therapist, I am somewhat uniquely positioned to compare it to the things that are out there in physical rehabilitation, because that's my training since 1969. So in my experience with working with children in particular, in usual physical therapy, it's common to just look for what the child can't do, and then to move the child through the motions of doing what they can't do. So if they can't sit, to sit them. If they can't reach, to ask them to reach. And often to ask for extra trying hard. And in my experience of having done that, because that is my earlier me, I find that the children who have trouble get even more trouble the more they try. And from ABM, I have a perspective that makes more sense of that. So I see that children learn from their own experience, and that's the foundations of ABM, is how can we tailor an experience for a child that allows the learning to continue endlessly, to take them where they are and get the learning going and keep it going. As they learn from their experience, so we're always looking, what do we think the child's experiencing, not what can we make them do. And so if I see that a child can't sit up, then I'm interested in what is it that's been missing in that child's experience that he's not able to put it together spontaneously in the way a typical child does. And so I look to help him to move spontaneously and feel the shifts and the variety of possibilities that occur when a typical baby's playing. But I look to tailor that experience, because a typical baby is moving with a lot of random possibilities, and they have a huge volume of experimentation. So they don't have any idea what's the right way or what's the best way, but they just try it over and over in millions of different ways. So they win through that sheer volume of random and experimentation. With a child that has special needs, the random doesn't necessarily occur. If they have a chromosome difference or brain damage or something that interrupts showing up with this incredible palette of random possibilities that a typical baby does. So in our work, we look at what's the child doing and how can I touch him and move him that gives him a feeling of the more optimal possibilities of how to put it together, so that they don't have to experiment as much as a typical child, because they don't. And so we'll never win on sheer volume. But we give them a more precise experience of what they are doing and of what they could do. And so again, in contrast to what might occur in regular physical therapy or rehabilitation, we don't make them wrong for what they are doing. They can't help but do what they do. What their brain generates is what they'll do. So if their brain makes their legs go like this, then their legs go like this. So we often will do, even exaggerate what the child is doing that others might call abnormal. Like stiffen the legs like this and bring them together. So I might instead maybe turn the leg even more where they're going and cross it even more across the other one until I can feel that their nervous system stops that tension. And that's what we experience, that when we exaggerate what they are doing, then their brain has no reason to continue to do it, and so they spontaneously let it go. Otherwise, they have no way to find how to inhibit it. Much of what we do in movement is actually the inhibition of what you don't want to do. And so you have to be able to inhibit what you don't want to do in order to do what you do want to do. If I want to reach for my cup, I have to not reach there, and not reach there, and not reach there, and not knock over the cup. I have to inhibit all that so I can just take the cup. And that inhibition is also interfered with by the brain having damage. because a lot of what the brain is busy doing is that inhibition, so that you can be discreet. So we look to exaggerate what they are doing so they can feel what I call the off switch. They have something they do and do and do and do, but they don't know how to stop doing. And so if I exaggerate it and they actually experience what it means to stop doing it, that's huge for them. To get an experience of letting go, of inhibiting the things that's in the way of what they can do. Well, we never know exactly what's going on in the brain, what we call the black box. We have to deduce from the outside by the outcome we get. And so what I experience is that if I exaggerate where they're going, then it stops. So my presumption is that when I exaggerate the crossing of their leg and it stops crossing even more, that their brain has turned off the contraction that's taking them there. So in response to feeling it done anyway, the brain turns it off. So that opens the possibility then of moving another way that has not even been in their repertoire. So such babies that never take their foot to their mouth. So basic to the Nathaniel method in Nat's book, Kids Beyond Limits, is talking about it in terms of these 9 essentials. So the 9 essentials are not things to do, but are rather how you do whatever you do. So the first is movement with attention. So however I touch or move the child, I'm looking to get their attention, first to what they are doing, and then to an experience of something else. So I get their attention to what they are doing when I exaggerate what they're doing. And then if it becomes easy, then I might take their leg and bring it like this so they actually see their own foot, and I take their sock off, but I go so slowly, I wait until they look where the sock is. If they're not looking, then I go even more slowly until they look to see what's going on, why isn't it off yet? And then maybe I go even slower until their hand comes toward it, or I touch it with their hand and engage them. So it engages their attention enormously, but when it engages their attention, their brain changes. So I have a child whose leg is always away from them, and as I get their attention visually, I'm looking toward the foot and they reach toward the sock, what I feel again that the brain is doing only because of the outcome I experience is that I feel the brain inhibits all this and begins to reset to new intentions. Oh, and they start to look for their own foot, which means the brain turns off the arching of the back and softens and lets the back lengthen and round like this, and they begin to be able to bring the foot toward them. And so all these things spontaneously change. So it's very multi-layered what's going on, which is, in my experience, exactly what you see in a typical baby, except that very complex combination of things occurs in a typical baby so seamlessly that we completely take it for granted. And we rarely are cognizant of how complex it is, because it happens. And it looks so easy that we don't even think anything of it. But when it doesn't work, and we have to help them piece it together, then you begin to see how many incredible layers there are involved in orienting toward it, looking toward it. There's so much that goes on. And so we try to, in whatever precise way we can, begin to duplicate some of that experience for a child in the context of them knowing themselves. That we think a lot of what the baby is doing in the first year is learning about themselves. They're learning that they have a hand, where their hand is, what happens when they move it in space. And then they find out the same thing with their foot. I find babies playing with their feet to be the most underrated baby activity on the planet. They are learning so much, I think, when they're playing with their own feet. And not just in about their leg and their foot, but in how to move the middle of themselves to bring the parts together, and usually what goes on with their vision. I think first their visual system develops in relationship to themselves. They look at their hand and focus on it, and then they continue to focus on it when it goes away, so they change their convergence and divergence in relationship to watching themselves, and then later with their foot. And so you see children later, you see they have visual problems or crossed eyes, And a lot of these things will spontaneously resolve in the midst of us working, even when we don't work directly on doing something with the eyes. So I don't touch the eyes, but if they're looking at their foot, their brain changes how they're using their eyes. But to get back to what you said, I wanted to say an important thing from my perspective. In my experience with the usual rehabilitation procedures of asking a child to do what they can't do, and they just keep trying harder to do what they can't do, the only thing they can try harder with is what they already know. And so if a child, it goes like this, and we say reach, then they get even stiffer trying to do more of what they know because they don't know the other. We look to help them find what it is they don't know and put it in there. So the huge difference I see as the path goes forward is that when we have children that are pushed to try harder, especially the children who get up to try to walk, and then the knees come together and the heels come off the floor and everybody says, stand up, and they just pull more into what they're already doing. And so some of them, with enough of a carrot hung in front where you say, do it, and you reward them, that will continue to do it for a while and have some semblance of progress, because they might be able to actually put one foot in front of the other and go across the room, hanging on a walker or something. But then somebody says, oh, now they're walking, even though it's nothing like 12-month-old walks. But what I see is that can't continue. It as a built-in ceiling to what can occur. They try harder and they try harder, and it doesn't feel good to walk like that. But somebody's saying, oh, that's good. Oh, yay, you're taking steps. You're doing what I want you to do. And so for a while, they'll continue because we're cheering them on. But a typical baby is designed to learn from what feels good, not from somebody cheering them and complimenting them to do what you want them to do, but because it actually feels good. They try it one way, they try it another way, until they get it to feel the best. So to have a child that's doing something that feels awful, but he's being complimented for it, will work for a period of time. Then if the child has enough selfhood, they'll eventually refuse. They'll say, it's too hard. Give me a wheelchair. It's hugely energy consuming to do things with this much effort. So some of them who have enough selfhood will start to quit when they're 10, 11, 12, 13, and say, I can't do this, it's too much work. It's not nice. It feels awful. But even if you can get through that, and you talk them into conforming enough that they want to do this to be like everybody else, they'll get to a time later when they're 20 or 25 or 30 when they literally can't. And it begins to look like they regress because they start to have pain, because they're using themselves in a way that the body's not designed to be used. And so the knees start to hurt, or the feet start to hurt, or the hips start to hurt, or the neck starts to hurt, or the back starts to hurt. And then they lose function because they can't persist doing it that way. In our work, we're constantly stepping back from whatever they're doing, whatever they're trying to do, to take the simplest thing they do and make it better. Because that's the way a typical baby learns, that they get so good at rolling over that they have the elements involved in the rolling over that make it possible for them to begin to belly crawl or to begin to get up on their all fours. But they learn the elements for the next thing from perfecting the earlier thing, not by somebody putting them in the thing they can't do. And so we look to take them back and say, well, let me see, how is he rolling? Oh, he never rolls easily. How can we help him to roll more easily? And when they roll more easily, then they spontaneously start to do some things that they weren't doing before. It's a wonderful surprise. People will come back and say, oh, after his lesson, in which maybe you were only rolling, he got up on his hands and knees for the first time, even though maybe we never put him on his hands and knees in the lesson. So I've been a physical therapist since 1969. So I've been present to the changing tide of how the brain is viewed. So it used to be that we thought the brain was fixed, that you were born with your IQ, And that's just the way it is. So you were born smart or you were born dumb. And if you were born dumb, well, then you're just dumb. And if you are brain damaged, well, then you're just out of luck. Because now the brain's damaged and nothing can happen. Because we thought it was a fixed commodity. And now we realize, and there's huge volumes now of neuroscience research, especially from Michael Merzenich at UCSF, University of California at San Francisco, and people that he works with across the world, that demonstrates how the brain literally structures itself from the experience. So it's not that the brain is fixed, but that as the brain is there, as the person begins to move and do and experience, the brain literally forms itself from that experience. Now, I think that that's not so obvious to people. To me, one of the most dramatic ways that it shows this is true is that when I started early in physical therapy was when children with Down syndrome were still being institutionalized. You had a child with Down syndrome and they would tell you to institutionalize him. Nothing's going to happen with this child. They have Down syndrome. So they would put them in an institution and they would be pretty much not functioning because no one expected them to function. So they would sit in an institution or lie in an institution. Some of them never spoke, never walked, never did hardly anything because they weren't expected to, and so no one gave them any experience that would take them there. So like I said earlier in our talk, if you have a chromosome difference or the brain damage, then the brain doesn't generate all that the material to learn from spontaneously. So a Down syndrome child doesn't show up necessarily generating all that learning process from the beginning. It depends on what's presented to him and how he's, in what way is he interacted with. And now it's expected that Down syndrome children will do well. I mean, they still say they have Down syndrome and people test ahead of time and decide whether they're going to abort. But the ones who are born and you get worked with the way they're worked with now, even not in our work, but just in the average rehabilitation, do millions of times better than they did 50 years ago because their experience is different. So their brain is the same brain. It still has Down syndrome. It still has 3 chromosomes where it should have 2 in every cell of that brain. But now it does something different because somebody offers a different experience. And in our work, they do even better. So I have children who now walk, and when they walk, people say, well, why doesn't he walk like a child with Down syndrome? I say, because I gave him an experience that was different than the experience that usually happens with a child with Down syndrome. So what I value the most in working with children this way is that it's such a joy both to me and to the child. So in some of the things I used to do as a typical or traditional physical therapist and rehabilitation approaches, there were often times that things would be uncomfortable for the child. People do stretching of muscles that are contracted. It doesn't feel comfortable to stretch. It doesn't feel comfortable to try hard, to work, struggle, or be put in a position where you don't feel free and you just have to struggle. Like with Lewis, when he's on his stomach and he doesn't know how to extend his back, then he's like trapped. So I don't try to keep him there. I try to give him a window of opportunity. But then when I see that look we were just talking about, of how he responds when he feels a novel experience, it's such a joy to me to see that joy in the child. And so it goes both ways. The most important first thing is that I make some kind of connection with the child where he feels safe and I get his attention, that it's interesting for him. And then from there, then it's wonderful for both of us because I feed off how much they're enjoying it and they feed off having someone with whom they can be safe and experience more freedom. And so it's just fabulous in both directions. And it's actually also a very intimate experience because I touch them in a way not that does something to them, but that brings them their attention to how to feel themselves. So I'm always looking to bring them home to how they feel themselves. And that's a privilege, to be able to bring a person to that kind of feeling of themselves. But that is an intimate connection to another human being. So it's a gift to be able to even do this work. And it's a gift to the children to have a way to find a different trajectory for their life that can make it possible for them to learn endlessly from where they are to the next thing, from where they are to the next thing, whether they have so much damage that they ever walk or not, but that they can always have a learning curve that never stops. Because you've created a vortex here where parents are drawn to look for this kind of possibility for their children, because it's my passion to reveal the possibility that's there, because it's my passion to make it more accessible to children everywhere. And so any place that somebody can create that kind of vortex that brings people together who are seeking that possibility, then I'm eager to be a part of it.